Not enough time, not enough money, I'm not in shape, I can't do it. I've heard it all. I get it. You're busy. Between work and kids, you're lucky if you have time to sleep, let alone go to the gym. You don't have to go to the gym 7 days a week to treat your body to the benefits of exercise. In fact, you don't have to go to the gym at all. Try a short walk on your lunch break, replace your office chair with an exercise ball to strengthen your core and burn extra calories. All you need is 30 minutes of moderate physical activity most days of the week, and it doesn't even have to be all at once. You can do this. Can't afford a gym membership? You don't need one. There are ways to work out for free. Believe it or not, soup cans are great makeshift weights. Marching or dancing can be done from the comfort of your own home. And trust me when I say, there's nothing nicer than a brisk walk through the great outdoors. To that I say, yes you can. Start small. You don't have to be that guy to be in shape. You don't have to run marathons, just take the dog for a nice walk. You don't have to pump iron, just get moving. Any little bit goes a long way. The benefits of any physical activity at all is far greater than the investment. Childhood obesity has tripled in the last 3 decades, and adults aren't much better. 1 billion people worldwide are overweight, and 300 million are obese. The risks associated with being overweight are overwhelming. Being active for at least 150 minutes a week can help reduce anyone's risk of premature death, heart disease, and stroke. Tired? Exercise will give you more energy. Overweight? Exercise will help you maintain a healthy weight and greatly reduce your risk of heart disease, diabetes, and overall mortality associated with physical inactivity. Trust me, your body will thank you. Want to know more? francoform.ca.
Beats Radio, scientists interviewing scientists. Canada is a worldwide leader in science and innovation. However, our communities need to be more connected to current scientific research in order to drive the future of scientific innovation. So what steps can we take to more actively engage and connect our community with scientists and vice versa? Innovation and discovery are at the core of the current efforts of our government, but science sometimes gets slightly complicated to understand. At Beats Radio, we will tackle this by having young scientists and early career researchers interviewing scientists and innovators. By dissecting science in simple terms, this will allow our community to better understand the importance of science for our country. Morning, and thanks for tuning in to Beats Research Radio. My name is Hallie Arnott, and I'm the Canadian Biomaterials Society Ottawa Student Chapter President and a graduate student in biomedical engineering at the University of Ottawa. Today, I'm back with you here at the University of Ottawa Heart Institute, streaming from an active lab here at Beats Research. Our goal at Beats Research Radio is to communicate the scientific research that's being conducted in the labs like the one behind me, and explain how it makes its way to the clinic and how we get medications into pharmacies, that kind of thing. A very unique aspect about our show is that we have early career researchers and scientists interviewing other scientists and clinicians and established researchers. Before we get going with our segment today, I'd like to thank the University of Ottawa Heart Institute, eLife, the Canadian Biomaterials Society, Ottawa Student Chapter, the Beats Research Lab, and the Department of BMI in the Faculty of Medicine at the University of Ottawa, who are supporting us here at Beats Research Radio. Also, don't forget to subscribe to our YouTube channel as well. You can visit our podcasts on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, and Google Podcasts. Now to get started with our interview, we have Dr. Michael DeLisio. Dr. DeLisio is an associate professor and molecular exercise physiologist at the University of Ottawa in the Faculty of Health Sciences, and he has a particular interest in stem cell biology. His research interests stem from stem cell biology and also exercise physiology, and this came from his training in kinesiology as well as his postdoc training in molecular muscle physiology. Dr. Lisio first established his exercise and stem cell lab at the University of Illinois prior to moving here to the University of Ottawa in 2016. The mission at the Exercise and Stem Cell Laboratory is to optimize endogenous stem cell populations through lifestyle modifications to maintain tissue regenerative capacity throughout a lifespan. So thank you very much for coming in today and talking with us about your research.
Yeah, thanks very much for having me. It's great to be here.
So could you tell our listeners a little bit about your background, how you became a researcher, how you became interested in science and working at the University of Ottawa?
Yeah, for sure. From back when I was a kid, I was always really interested in sports, obviously, and also in how the body worked and how the body functioned. So it was always kind of a goal of mine to find a way to combine those two interests for my career in the future. So initially, I had thought, maybe an orthopedic surgeon or sports medicine doctor would kind of be the way to go. And during my undergrad, I volunteered actually for an orthopedic surgeon, and part of my position was working for him in his research lab, and then also going into his clinic and observing his surgeries and doing stuff like that. So it was through that experience that I actually found that I liked the research a lot more than I liked being in the clinic and being in the surgeries. So I thought maybe I'd change career paths a little bit, or career ideas, and try research. So that led me to doing a master's and a PhD at McMaster University in kinesiology. So in that field, we can basically combine exercise with some more basic understanding of human biology. And then to go a little bit deeper into the human biology, stem cell biology part, I did a postdoc at the University of Illinois. So I was there for 2 years, basically, as a postdoc. And I was hired on there as faculty to start my own lab, as you mentioned. And then being Canadian, it was always a goal of mine to get back to Canada and contribute to Canadian science in Canada. So I always had a kind of an eye open to opportunities in Canada. And when the one came up in Ottawa, it was a perfect opportunity, I think, for me, because obviously there's a huge and very rich stem cell biology environment, and also a very good human kinetics kinesiology program. It's also a great city to live in. So when the opportunity came up, I jumped at it, and I've been here for about 3 years now. So yeah, it's been great.
Did you move some of your students from Illinois to Ottawa as well?
Yeah, so actually, the 2 students I had down there were about a year from finishing. So they decided to stay down there and finish down there. So I kind of supervised them remotely. Went down to visit a few times. And they all, they were all able to finish collecting their data and get through their degrees. It was a nice buffer, actually, because to have them down there and have them continue to work and produce data, it was nice to kind of have that while I was rebuilding basically the lab up here.
Yeah,
so
definitely.
So I think it worked out for them and for me too, obviously. So yeah.
Good. So why is it important to link stem cell biology and exercise? Is there a key in these two fields?
Yeah, so I think we know there's a lot of good information out there about that exercise is good for you and benefits you, not just for healthy people, improving performance, right, in athletes, but also for people with chronic diseases and help preventing and also, recovering from them if they're diagnosed.
Exactly.
But we know that a major problem, or a limitation, I guess, with exercise is that not many people are really excited about doing it. So there's only about 20% of Canadians actually meet the physical activity guidelines that are out there, even though we have all this information that says it's good for you. So I think if we can develop a better understanding at the cellular and molecular level of how exercise is working, then we can develop exercise inspired therapies. It's kind of like what we try to do, to either supplement the effects of exercise or get some of the benefits without actually doing as much exercise or doing any exercise. We'll never replace exercise, but if we can get some of the benefits or help augment some of the benefits with doing less, then I think that would be a good thing for population population health. So
right, or
yeah.
especially in cases where someone is not able to exercise as much as somebody who's able-bodied, those would definitely be beneficial for somebody in that position.
Yeah, absolutely. You see examples of that. So yeah.
Right. So in your lab, because you're looking at exercise, but you're also looking at stem cells, how do you go about designing a study or going through the process? Do you start with looking at the exercise and then boiling that down to the biology, or do you start with the biology and kind of work your way back to the exercise?
Yeah, that's a that's a tough question. I mean, we have so there's a lot of like diseases and models where exercise is established to be beneficial.
Yeah.
So in those cases, we'll start with the guidelines or the prescribed exercise guidelines, and then work backwards or work kind of to the micro level and see how those guidelines in this disease model or this disease condition are affecting different cells and different tissues inside the body. On the other hand, there's a lot of developing stem cell therapy approaches, whether they be stem cell transplants, stem cell injections of tissues, stuff like that, where there's not much exercise literature there. So can we actually see if exercise can synergize with some of these effects? Kind of doing like a rehab plus cell therapy approach to treating or different diseases.
Right.
So yeah, so it depends on really the condition, depends on what we know and what's out there.
Okay.
But yeah, that's kind of how we approach the
So
questions.
your lab, is it quite interdisciplinary in the sense that you have people who are coming from a kinesiology background, others that come from a pure biological stem cell background, or is it kind of everyone is merged and they learn about a little bit about everything?
Yeah, so it is pretty interdisciplinary, pretty diverse. So I get a lot of students from obviously with a kin background or a human kinetics background who kind of are like me and wanted to learn more about the basic workings of the human body and why and how exercise is good for you. And then I also get some of the other side of it where you get people from cell biology programs or biosciences programs who know a lot about different metabolic pathways and cell signaling pathways and stem cell biology, who are now interested at seeing more of maybe a translational approach or a more practical approach at how these cells are and how lifestyle can affect the basic mechanisms inside cells. So yeah, it's a bit of a mix, and then so there's a bit of a learning curve usually when people come into the lab because
Definitely.
Yeah, it's just the basic sciences in exercise and kinesiology are starting to be taught more at the undergrad level, and so for those students they have a bit of a background, and so it's easier to get them up to speed.
Definitely.
But there is
merging two fields is always a difficult task, but the outcomes are always usually pretty beneficial for especially in medicine. So that's great. Do you think you could tell us a little bit about so radiation is universally used as a therapy for cancer, but patients do experience a lot of negative effects due to this. Could you tell us a little bit about the research that your lab is doing that looks at how exercise and obesity have an impact on what types of complication a patient would experience?
Yeah, so this is kind of a newer area that my lab's gotten into in the last 3 or 4 years or so. And we think it's actually a pretty important issue because now in Canada we know that 2/3 of patients diagnosed with cancer are going to survive long term, and most of those patients, like you said, will get radiation therapy. So the increasing number of long-term cancer survivors is kind of like this, I would say, newer population of people who are going to have a lot of long-term consequences, and clinically, for the most part, I don't want to say they've been ignored, but they're kind of not a high priority because a cancer patient gets diagnosed. The goal is to treat them and then get them through their cancer diagnosis, without much long-term consideration of how this is going to affect their quality of life moving forward. But yeah, so we started looking at these questions, and we know that radiation increases cancer risk and secondary cancer risk in survivors, and even despite a lot of the advances in radiation therapy where they're using lower doses and hitting less of healthy tissue, there's still, the rates of long-term or secondary cancers is high. And the rates of long-term complications in different tissues is also high. And so we were asking, how can lifestyle effects modify this risk or mitigate this risk? And so, and then within this cancer survivorship population, obesity is a growing issue, especially in the general population for sure, but also obesity and physical inactivity are especially prevalent in cancer survivors.
Okay.
And so we thought how to combat that. We looked at exercise as a potential way to reversing some of the effects.
Right.
So within that area of research, we kind of have studies that are looking kind of at whole body health span and long-term cancer incidence.
Right.
Using preclinical models.
Okay.
And then also looking at the molecular level, how is radiation and combined with these other lifestyle factors affecting changes inside the tissues.
Right.
Yeah.
So the positive effects of exercise on someone who would be receiving radiation, are you trying to, in patients who have obesity and who are undergoing radiation, are you trying to, get the positive effects for the patients with obesity and trying to design different things at the molecular level so you can help them? Or is it more we're going to learn about how it's beneficial here and then try to get these patients to exercise more?
Yeah. So I guess we're trying to do both and get the message out for both. Yeah. So the first side of the question is how does obesity actually affect the cellular changes that happen after exposure to radiation. And then how can exercise combat that? So what we're seeing in our data is that basically exercise is improving some of the effects, and we're looking specifically at the blood system and at skeletal muscle.
Okay.
So we're seeing improvements in the effects, the long-term effects of radiation with exercise, regardless of whether our mice are obese or lean.
Right.
And so in the obese mice, most of the data that we have suggests that exercise brings them back to a mouse that was lean but not active.
Right. Okay.
So it's beneficial, in both conditions, yeah.
Okay. So from my understanding, your lab has also studied the role of stem cell muscles in cachexia, where the body experiences weakness from chronic diseases or chronic illnesses. Has your lab discovered what this role is, or if it's a good role or a bad role?
Yeah, so within this context, like you said, we study cachexia specifically related to cancer.
Okay.
And so that's muscle and adipose tissue wasting in patients who have mostly advanced stage
and due
cancer.
to the disease, or because they are not able to exercise as much?
Yeah, it's due primarily to the disease. I mean, they're mostly inactive, but yeah, definitely, because if you get rid of the tumor, if you cure them, then the cachexia can be prevented or reversed.
Right. Okay.
Yeah. So within that field, a lot of people have focused on processes involved in muscle degeneration or muscle repair and muscle growth, basically.
Okay.
But that's focused mostly on the muscle fibers. But since cachexia is like a chronic degenerative condition, not a lot of groups have really focused on the stem cells in muscle and how muscle stem cells can help regenerate muscle. So they haven't really looked at that side much.
Okay.
There's been a few nice papers out there that have suggested that muscle stem cells are dysfunctional in patients with cachexia.
Okay.
And so now, we're using some of our data shows that exercise can help reverse some of this dysfunction.
Okay.
And so the two goals of that are, number one, to understand more like how exercise is reversing that dysfunction, so we can develop, like I said, these exercise-inspired therapies.
Okay.
And then also maybe, like I wouldn't expect most cachectic patients are pretty deconditioned, so it would be pretty hard for them to actually exercise, like get on a treadmill or lift weights or do something like that.
Yeah.
So can we use other, new exercise modalities? So can we do, say, muscle stimulation, electrical stimulation, stuff like that.
So alternative therapies to exercise.
Right.
Cool. It's very interesting. So once the role is determined, because it's a new area for you, after you determine this, is it kind of the goal would be to put out a protocol maybe for patients who are in this state, or to maybe develop drug development, maybe give advice to patients and their clinicians? What would be the goal?
Yeah, so the long-term goal would be to develop a new therapy. So it'd be an exercise-inspired, potentially like a stem cell-based therapy that would we could translate into patients. Wow. That would be a long-term kind of future goal, but this is why, if we understand how exercise works in these conditions, then we can develop those types of therapies.
Right.
So that's kind of what we're working hard at right now.
Very, very cool.
Yeah.
So your lab also is interested in mechanisms that are responsible for exercise-induced stem cell mobilization. Would you be able to tell us what stem cell mobilization is, and also what it is in the context of exercise-induced stem cell mobilization, and also why it's important to elucidate these mechanisms and look at them in more detail?
Yeah. So we have so basically the bone marrow, so that deep inside your bones is home to a whole bunch of different types of stem cells in your body, and they can get mobilized into blood in response to a number of different stressors. For example, like we're at the Heart Institute, so a heart attack will mobilize stem cells from the marrow into the blood.
Okay.
And these stem cells have a number of different roles. One of the roles is to help regenerate blood vessels or create new blood vessels.
Yep.
Some other roles, they're involved in the immune response to help fight off infections, and some other people think that they might also help regrow damaged tissues. Not by directly replacing them, but by basically creating an environment where the tissues can repair themselves.
Okay.
And so data from our lab and a lot of other labs have shown that exercise is a stress that can actually mobilize a number of different stem cell populations. And so we think that this could have some clinical implications. For one thing, it could maybe explain some of the benefits of exercise. So if exercise is constantly mobilizing these regenerative cells, that might help improve tissue health. Another clinical aspect that we've considered is using exercise as an adjuvant for stem cell mobilization in the context of stem cell transplant. So either with the common mobilizing drugs, or usually in addition to the common mobilizing drugs, maybe we can use exercise to enhance stem cell mobilization to decrease the amount of time it takes to collect blood stem cells to do the transplants. Yeah. So
very interesting.
Yeah.
So do you think, what would be the main challenge in that realm of, I guess, stem cells and exercise? What do you see a roadblock there? What would be like a main roadblock for that type of study?
Yeah. So on the basic science side, exercise is it's not a very specific stimulus. So it's going to affect the whole body, and it's going to affect multiple pathways within the body. So that's a challenge on the basic science side, because it doesn't provide a very clean, like, this is the mechanism and this is the target we're going to go after.
Walking and versus running could provide a different response.
The dose, the intensity of exercise, the duration, all of these things can provide, could potentially provide different responses. So that's challenging. Then the other challenge on the clinical side is actually getting people to do it. So finding ways that it'll actually encourage patients to do it, even though we know it's good for you. So
definitely. Okay. So I guess the walking versus running, intensity, duration, are those all factors that you, or I guess variables that you keep track of in each one of your studies? And have you found out whether or not like duration or intensity are a factor for specific studies?
Yeah, so for our group, I mean, we try to use exercise, we follow exercise guidelines or exercise protocols that have been established to be useful or beneficial in the populations that we study.
Right. So there's like a threshold limit sort of.
Yeah, or like the recommended limit. Yeah. And so we can monitor that even in our preclinical mouse studies. So we use specific models where we can actually measure how much the mice are exercising and for what intensity. Yeah.
Okay. Definitely.
So yeah, we definitely monitor that.
Okay. What do you think the long-term goal of exercise and stem cell, like your lab, what's the long-term goal? What are you guys trying to achieve there in, I guess, maybe 20 years?
Yeah. So yeah, the long-term goal, I've probably said it a couple of times, is just to develop these exercise-inspired therapies that can either synergize or work with exercise, or be used in lieu of exercise in patients who either can't or are unwilling to exercise.
Definitely.
So yeah.
And just before we go, you're part of the Canadian Society of Exercise Physiology. Do you mind giving us a little bit of knowledge on that and what it's like to be a part of that?
Yeah, so it's great. So this is an organization that basically promotes and oversees exercise physiology, both at the academic level and also in the professional level in Canada. Okay. So I've been part of that group as a student for a long time, and now I'm on the board of that group. So we publish exercise guidelines for different conditions. So the website's www.csep.ca. So I encourage people to check it out. Yeah, if they're
Awesome.
interested.
Perfect. Well, thank you very much for joining us today at Beats Research Radio. And thank you to all of our listeners today. Don't forget to subscribe to our YouTube channel, and you can also visit our podcast.
Diabetes. Diabetes is a chronic disease in which blood sugar is not processed correctly. Insulin is a hormone designed to control the levels of blood sugar in your body. Blood sugars can become too high if you do not produce enough insulin or if insulin does not work properly. There are different types of diabetes. Type 1 diabetes occurs when the body stops making insulin. About 5 to 10% of people with diabetes have type 1, and it is always treated with insulin. About 90% of people with diabetes have type 2, and it usually affects adults. Type 2 diabetes occurs when insulin does not work well, causing blood sugar levels to rise. Gestational diabetes is a temporary condition that occurs in pregnancy. If you experience gestational diabetes, you have a higher risk of type 2 diabetes and cardiovascular disease and should continue to follow up with your doctor. Prediabetes is a condition in which blood sugars are higher than normal, but not high enough to fit the criteria for diabetes. Nearly half of the people affected with prediabetes will develop diabetes at some point in their lives. Signs and symptoms can include the following: unusual thirst, frequent urination, weight change, gain or loss, extreme fatigue or lack of energy, blurred vision, frequent or recurring infections, cuts and bruises that are slow to heal, tingling or numbness in the hands or feet, trouble getting or maintaining an erection. If you have any of these symptoms, it is important to contact your healthcare provider right away. It is important to recognize that many people who have type 2 diabetes have no symptoms. What are some of the risk factors for type 2 diabetes? Anyone over the age of 40 should be tested for diabetes every 3 years. Anyone who has one or more risk factors should be tested more frequently. Having a parent, brother, or sister with diabetes, if you are of Aboriginal, Hispanic, South Asian, Asian, or African descent, having been diagnosed with prediabetes, impaired glucose tolerance, or impaired fasting glucose, having high blood pressure, having high cholesterol or other fats in the blood, being overweight, especially if that weight is mostly carried around the tummy, having been diagnosed with obstructive sleep apnea, having been prescribed glucocorticoid medication by a doctor, if you were diagnosed with gestational diabetes. Diabetes can lead to serious complications and premature death, but those who have diabetes can take steps to control the disease and lower the risk of complications. Heart and blood vessel disease, nerve damage, neuropathy, kidney damage, nephropathy, eye damage, retinopathy. Education. Diabetes education is an important first step. All people with diabetes need to be informed about their condition. Diabetes education is free. Physical activity. Aim for 30 minutes of moderate to vigorous activity a day. Nutrition. What, when, and how much you eat all play an important role in regulating blood glucose levels. Weight management. Maintaining a healthy weight is especially important in the management of type 2 diabetes. Medication. Type 1 diabetes is always treated with insulin. Type 2 diabetes is managed through physical activity, meal planning, medications, and/or insulin to assist your body in controlling blood glucose more effectively. Lifestyle management. Learning to reduce stress levels in day-to-day life can help people with diabetes better manage their disease. Say goodbye to guilt and consider yourself a step ahead now that you know more about how to control this disease. Blood pressure. High blood pressure can lead to eye disease, heart disease, stroke, and kidney disease, so people with diabetes should try to maintain a blood pressure level at or below 130/80. To do this, you may need to change your eating and physical activity habits and/or take medication. For more information, please visit our website.
Good morning, and welcome back to Beats Research Radio. My name is Hallie Arnott, and today for our second segment, we have Dr. Erin Mulvihill with us today. Dr. Mulvihill is a scientist and director of the Energy Substrate Metabolism Research Laboratory at the University of Ottawa Heart Institute. She's also an assistant professor with the Department of Biochemistry, Microbiology, and Immunology with the Department or the Faculty of Medicine at the University of Ottawa. With her expertise in lipids, lipid proteins, models of diabetes, cardiovascular disease, and intestinal biology, as well as mouse genetics, her lab and research program aims to improve our understanding of the molecular events that lead to understanding cardiovascular disease and metabolic diseases. Aside from her research, today Dr. Mulvihill is going to give us a little insight about the Gila monster, gut peptides, and glycemia. But before we get into our topic today, do you mind telling us a little bit about yourself and how you found yourself in the field of science and biology and working here at the Institute?
Right. So thank you for having me. I think this is a really great format, and I'm really happy to share my science here.
Thanks for coming.
So I actually have always just been really interested in nature and how things unfold, and also in puzzles and that type of thing. So I was really drawn into science after I did my undergraduate degree, and I was very privileged. For my PhD training, I went into a lab at the University of Western Ontario that treated research much like a family affair, where you were really well supported. We had excellent technical people, we had excellent academic people, and we had this really nice group where you could learn. And so I was really given this amazing privilege where I had the capacity to make mistakes and try things and sort of pioneer new techniques, and I really loved it. And then I was really lucky. I was accepted into Daniel Drucker's lab in Toronto, which at this time, and a little bit of what we're going to focus on today, was studying gut hormones and their importance in metabolic disease. And so at this time, he had really gotten a collection of expertise from across Canada to really work together as a team and understand how we could improve outcomes or how we could inform on clinical disease for patients. So again, just another opportunity to really grow and learn in a really well-supported environment. And then I had the opportunity to come to Ottawa, and it's again been an excellent environment where I feel really supported, and now I get to create that for my trainees.
Yeah. So the interdisciplinary environment, I feel like that is one of the key aspects of science as a whole, from your experience.
Yeah. So I think here in Ottawa, we're really lucky because we have a small group of scientists here at the Heart Institute, but they are all experts in their respective fields. So we have chemists, we have statisticians, we have cellular biologists, we have people who understand microscopy, and they are all top level. So basically, any interest you have, we can find a person that can help you execute, which is really amazing. Yeah.
So in your lab here, you guys focus on type 2 diabetes and also gut hormones. Could you tell us a little bit about what type 2 diabetes is and how gut hormones have to do with type 2 diabetes?
Right. So type 2 diabetes is a condition where people have high blood sugar.
Okay.
They also have high blood fat. And the combination of the high blood sugar and the high blood fat can damage a lot of their cardiovascular vessels. So what happens is people with diabetes are really at very high risk of complications due to this disease.
Okay.
And that includes blindness. It includes cardiovascular complications. And so really what we try to do is lower blood sugar levels and lower blood fat levels so that these very important complications do not happen.
Okay. And gut hormones, those are, like, if you could describe what a gut hormone is, what it would it look like, where would it reside?
Right. So I think people don't really know, but the gut is actually the body's largest endocrine organ.
Okay.
So a lot of peptide hormones are produced in the gut, and what they do is they actually link what we eat with how it is utilized by the body. Okay. So there's sort of these intricate links of you consume nutrients, these gut hormones are produced, and then they can target various tissues in the body to say utilize this energy or leave this energy for another tissue.
Okay, so the disconnect with type 2 diabetes and these gut hormones is in what particular area? Is it they don't have enough gut hormones, or?
Right. So basically, so type 2 diabetes is a spectrum. So there are people who still produce insulin. There are people who do not produce insulin. So so really it's a multifactorial disease process. but gut hormones can actually restore some of that linking with meal ingestion and the pancreas, such that the pancreas can begin to work properly again and restore sort of that, tunable or with food intake and then hormone relief.
Okay. So I'm very interested to ask you this next question, because what does the Gila monster and gut peptides have to do with type 2 diabetes?
Right.
This is something that we were talking about earlier, and I just thought that this was the coolest thing. So do you mind telling our listeners a little bit about what that animal is and how it has come into the world of medication and diabetes?
Right. So this actually builds on a story that was happening a lot. It started probably in the 1970s and the 1980s, where people were discovering a lot of hormones and peptide biology, and that they could have this dramatic impact on the pancreas and insulin secretion, which is really the defects that are at the root of diabetes. So there was a peptide biologist, John Ng, who was actually really interested in how the methods for detecting peptide hormones could be developed. And he was certain that we were really not understanding a lot of biology just because we couldn't measure it. So he was also convinced that reptiles and animals that don't eat very often, so the Gila monster is a reptile, a lizard that you often see in Arizona, and it eats about 3 to 4 times a year. So he was convinced that within the salivary glands of these reptiles, there may be undiscovered peptide hormones that could have important implications for biology, particularly on the pancreas. So he began evaluating the saliva, or what was in the salivary glands of these particular lizards, and he discovered extendin-4. And what was really exciting was there had been previous research in humans which had determined that a glucagon-like peptide 1, or this gut hormone, could improve insulin secretion. But the effects were really, really fast. And so getting around that seemed to be very difficult in order to provide that as a therapeutic option for patients. But what was really exciting about extendin-4 was its effects were much longer. And so it was very much a fortuitous observation at the right time, where the community was ready to sort of say, oh, this is important, we should pursue this.
So this extendin-4, that is what allows this animal to only eat 3 or 4 times a year? That specific, I guess, peptide is it?
So it's a peptide hormone. It definitely,
it's part of the
exactly, and it's part of what is released along with venom and toxins in these animals, and then they have dramatic effects on digestion, much as I was saying, gut hormones do. They control the biology of the gut to maximize nutrient uptake and these types of things.
So once this discovery happened, was the next step creating the medications for type 2 diabetes patients, or was there kind of a disconnect? Did it take a while?
Right. So actually, Dr. Ng went to his technology transfer office, and they actually told him, you know what, we're really not interested.
Oh no.
So he took his findings and presented them at a poster. So just a plug for all the students out there that often toil away in poster sessions. It was actually at a poster session where his work was picked up by pharmaceutical companies, and they got interest. And it really was a rocky road. It certainly was not a straight path. At that time, there was not a lot of faith put into sort of these biological peptides, because it was a sort of therapeutic avenue that hadn't been proven. So it really took a lot of working together. So I mean, we often think, pharmaceutical companies are maybe not the best to partner with, but really in this case, it was a lot of drive working 2 pharmaceutical companies together that actually brought this therapy to the market.
So in the market today, are the formulations, medications for type 2 diabetes patients, Are they mostly derived from this discovery, or are there other formulations? Like, what's the mix in there right now?
Right. So there's actually sort of two classes of these therapies that are now taken by millions of patients. And some are still based on the Gila monster sequence, and some are based on the human sequence. So that's really exciting. And what's actually been happening now is we're getting into oral administration, which should also help because patients really like the idea of taking things orally. And we certainly want to increase the ability of patients to have access to this medication.
Definitely. So before oral medication for diabetes, was it, what was the form of delivery?
Right. So they're injectables.
Yeah. Very cool. So where do you think that the formulations are going? Do you think that these injectable medications are going to kind of go off the deep end and it's now going to be completely oral medications, or where do you see the future for this going?
Right. So I think what's really exciting and what has come to light recently is that these therapies, as I said, people with diabetes are at risk of cardiovascular disease. Well, now we've had outcomes in thousands of patients with diabetes to say that these therapies based on gut hormones actually prevent people from dying of cardiovascular disease. So I think as we can refine their chemistry, again, sort of taking these clinical observations and going back to the lab and redefining what parts of the molecule are really important, we'll probably see these therapies in clinic for quite a long time.
So supporting basic and translational and clinical aspects of science was something that before our interview today was something that you think was extremely important. Why do you think it's really important to support all aspects of this type of medical science?
Right. So I think gut hormones are a really great example because, I mean, the sequences were originally derived from fish, and then it's like you see this reptile that has sort of taught us a lot about the peptide biochemistry. And then it really was also another group in Europe was working from a clinical perspective, where they had observed that patients who had gastric surgery also had low glucose levels. And so it was all these groups really looking through a different lens that allowed them to sort of build on each other. And I think that is really that type of synergy is so important. So we really aren't very good at predicting where discoveries come from. So I think what we really need to do is invest in all forms of discovery, because even though some are a little bit closer to the patient, we never know where we are going to see these sort of dramatic effects on global health, where their origins really start.
Right. That's why, similar to what you were talking about earlier in the segment, the interdisciplinary environments that we have in science are extremely important in order to have these discoveries being made in order to support all different aspects of people's strengths and then bringing up people's weaknesses in the field. I think it's really great. It's an awesome opportunity. So maybe if you could talk a little bit about your lab specifically being embedded here at the University of Ottawa Heart Institute. How do you think this is important to your research, and how does it support your research team?
Right. So I have never worked really embedded in clinical care. And as I said previously, we're a pretty small and tight group here. So I actually know the people who do the transplants. I actually know the people who treat the aneurysms and all of these types of things. And the really interesting thing is they can identify and clearly articulate on behalf of their patients what the gaps are in the care. And so this has really motivated me, if possible, to try and address some of these gaps. So, I mean, we now have a portion of my research which is more translational, where we work with human samples, where we're trying to inform on patient conditions, which is something that I probably wouldn't have pursued except for I have access to this amazing expertise here at the Heart Institute.
Definitely. Do you think you could talk a little bit about maybe a current project you have going on in your lab that would be of interest to some of our listeners today?
Right. So we're really interested in trying to look at things or evaluate these treatments in models that more accurately reflect patients. So we've been looking at the effects of aging and how that interacts with gut hormones and how they over time are can mediate a lot of these beneficial effects, because these diseases take a long time to develop.
Right.
And we really need to understand how these messages sort of rewire the metabolic circuit. And then from that rewiring, how we can intervene and sort of restore the normal metabolism.
Right. Do you think that specifically in diabetes research, it's work towards more preventative management, or would it be, post, like once somebody does have this disease, is it more towards trying to manage their disease in that sense?
Well, I think prevention is key, and it's definitely easier to prevent something than to deal with the long-term complications. But we sort of work in both areas. So the whole idea, if we can preserve the function of the pancreas, that's probably easier than regenerating it. Although, in Canada, we do have an excellent stem cell team that is actively working to restore glucose in a physiological way. So that's really exciting. But we definitely sort of work in all spectrums of the disease, because we do have a lot of Canadians that are suffering at all spectrums.
And this might be, so difference between a management for type 2 diabetes versus type 1, is the research completely different, or do these fields kind of merge together a little bit and work as teams?
Yeah, so I think we are beginning to understand that there is a lot of overlap. We used to think that they existed sort of in silos. They are very different diseases, and in a lot of aspects they are. And there are a lot of different molecular things that happen across the spectrum of type 1 and across the spectrum of type 2.
Exactly.
But what we are finding is that, some people that we used to put in this silo maybe actually are more belong in the other silo. And so how does that affect how we treat them and what types of drugs we give them and what their outcomes will be and what we need to. So that's something I think we're just beginning to understand.
Okay. And in terms of during the research aspects of a drug or discoveries, do you find that pharmaceutical companies do kind of come in and try to get into the early stages, or is it more like the Gila monster sort of scenario where the discovery had already been made and they come in afterwards? Do you think there would be an benefit from them coming in early on and giving some input, working with researchers?
Yeah, so I think we probably don't appreciate the excellent research that happens at companies and how they really integrate well with researchers to basically move patient care forward. So I think there have been some amazing achievements by scientists at companies, and that this is probably underappreciated. But yeah, I think that we have examples where, a lot of discoveries sort of originated with a company or originated with a relationship with a small group of researchers, and then we have other examples where things can be ignored by companies for many years, and then once they sort of are on the verge of their potential, then they are really adopted quickly. And
I guess it's all about what will make the money in the industry too. It's a bigger driver for sure. So do you mind, this is I guess a little side question, but I also know that you're the faculty supervisor to the University of Ottawa Heart Institute Trainee Committee. What motivated you to become a part of this and get involved with the students, get involved with the postdocs here at the Institute?
Right. So as I said, I was really privileged during my training to work in these incredibly supportive environments. So when I started this position, I thought that this would just be a way for me to try to sort of give back in terms of creating positive experiences with other trainees. But what I really learned is that we have this dynamic, interdisciplinary, very worldly group that has great ideas, and it's really been a privilege to try to facilitate them. And I think the other thing that has come through from them is that they don't all want to work in academia, and so taking those sort of critical skills and applying them to other jobs and providing other avenues of training to sort of broaden this experience has also been another motivation.
Okay, cool. Yeah, students are always gung-ho about learning, and I think that's a really great committee to be a part of. So thank you very much for joining us here on Beats Research Radio. Thank you to all of our listeners today, and we will catch you next week at the same time.
Beats Radio, scientists interviewing scientists. Canada is a worldwide leader in science and innovation. However, our communities need to be more connected to current scientific research in order to drive the future of scientific innovation. So what steps can we take to more actively engage and connect our community with scientists and vice versa? Innovation and discovery are at the core of the current efforts of our government, but science sometimes gets slightly complicated to understand. At Beats Radio, we will tackle this by having young scientists and early career researchers interviewing scientists and innovators. By dissecting science in simple terms, this will allow our community to better understand the importance of science for our country.